First law of the Killer's Code. Respect the elders.
Azzy, why'd you drag me out here?
Azrael stands on a cliff across from what might have been a landfill, or perhaps all that's left of a small town. He can't be too sure. Everything blurs together in this gray, burnt-out husk of a realm.
Azzy? Hey, Azzy, are you ignoring me?
He doesn't respond, even as she prods his back with a sharp finger.
Azzy! Azzy! Azzy!
Every utterance of his name comes with another poke.
Azzy!
When Azrael looks over his shoulder, he finds a ripple forming in the space behind them. Hel steps from the gateway, and without so much as a passing nod, she picks up Navan.
You keep this up and I'll get the baby sling.
No, not the dreaded baby sling!
So stop distracting him. He's studying.
Second law of the Killer's Code. Seniority is weighed in lives taken, not years lived. A gentle tug with his index finger and thumb pull his hood forward. There's so much that Azrael still has to learn. He hadn't sensed Hel's arrival. Even now, the only presences he can count are Navan's, his teacher's, and his own. Speaking of his teacher, he refocuses on the sight before him. The lot is empty, but doesn't stay that way for long. Several figures stumble onto the scene. They're lower than deities, but greater than mortals, swine that doesn't even deserve classification. They're right on schedule. He'd been given a specific time and location. Azrael knew he couldn't be late if he wanted to watch his teacher go to work.
You still haven't told me why you brought me along, Azzy. He's not my teacher.
That's a good point. I wonder why he brought you here.
He's at odds with himself. Stay and learn, or leave and satisfy Navan. Well, she could go, but then he'd get very little insight on the coming display. A rolling wind seizes Azrael's attention. The breeze doesn't come alone, as a soft whistle sheds from the biting air. By now, Azrael has the tell committed to memory. A low hum beneath the careless wind, carrying the bitter taste of soot and blood. It's his teacher's calling card. Funny. Azrael's earliest lesson had involved calling cards, signatures, and trademarks, and how he shouldn't have one. His kills should be indistinguishable from fatal happenstance. Another lesson that followed was that Azrael could have a signature, if he was talented enough to afford one. Azrael watches a stream of white lily petals float onto the scene. As he stares, eyes locked forward, he feels a nipping chill at the base of his neck. The unknowing prey look around while rubbing themselves for warmth.
Azzy? Did it just get really cold?
For good measure, Azrael lets his arms hang loose. His fingers go taut, and the ends of his fingernails begin to heat up. He feels blood running down from his heart, through his veins, over his knuckles, and to his nails. From the tips of his fingers come his thread, long, thin, and gleaming in the light. His wires snake down to the ground, and then some. Subtle twitches of his fingers command the thread, allowing him to position them around Navan. All it would take is a single flick of his pinky and he could restrain her. Any more pressure, or a tug with any other finger and he'd cut through her skin. His sight demands a steady hand. Navan has the tendency to lose herself when exposed to blood, so Azrael has to make sure she doesn't get too excited during the show. At the same time, he absolutely needs her to watch his teacher's every move, even more intently than he does. Third law of the Killer's Code. Never kill without pay.
I don't want to miss this. I mean, it's whatever, but I still don't want to miss it.
Even sitting down, Hel still towers over Azrael. The giantess summons her rifle and stares out at the killing ground through her scope. Azrael looks back to the lot, where the targets back away as a figure appears before them. In comes the familiar smell of death, and the sound of creaking bones making way for muscle. Damp cloth drags across the sand. There's a flickering light extending out from a helmet atop his head. The glow flashes in and out, diced up between the four targets standing like deer in his headlights. Worn hands tremble atop a pickaxe used as a walking cane. Wrinkles crease along his elongated, soot-covered face, curving around to the back of his head by way of pointed, bat-like ears. He reeks of coal and minerals, and every step brings with it an updraft of soot. The old man is here. Supé. Supé comes to a stop before his prey. Looking up, the old man cocks his neck to the side. A crack accompanies the motion. The group of dead men laugh. Soot blows into his eyes, but Azrael doesn't blink.
Azzy, those men, they're about to...
He hears her panting, and the way her voice shifts back and forth between sounding scared and aroused. It's different when they're in control. When they pick and choose who die, they don't feel this unholy sense of helplessness. He's only felt this way once before, and he shudders in spite of himself. This must be how their targets felt all the time.
I don't want to see it. It's gonna be bad. Real bad. I know it. I know it.
After that, she shrieks.
Ah!
It happens when she's ill-prepared and hasn't taken flight yet. This is why Azrael needs to prep her, to show her a bit of blood before the curtains rise. That screech lets Azrael know for certain that these men do die here. Navan senses it. Now all she needs is to see it happen. Then he'll know. He's shaking so much he almost can't control himself. In that moment, Azrael can't tell his twitching thumbs from the rest of his fingers. His eyes widen when he hears a cry from over his shoulder.
Raven!
Fourth law of the killer's code. No distractions.
Something cut me.
Navan rubs her arm and pulls her hand away to reveal her painted red palm. Soon, the scarlet on her hand reflects in her eyes. A long, soft gasp escapes her quivering body. Navan squirms in place. As Navan gyrates, she works her hands up her slender midsection.
Azzy. I want to have fun.
She leaps up into the air. She spins and summons her scythe mid-twirl. Ebony feathers dance around her form, momentarily disarming Azrael with the beauty of it all. He works to restrain Navan, all while keeping an eye on Supay. He whips both his arms outwards, then flicks his wrists downwards. He flexes fingers over and over again, until he has his wires where he wants them. One more tug and his wires lasso Navan, restraining her in midair. She moans, and Azrael feels the vibrations traveling down his wires and all the way into his core. Azrael gently lowers Navan to the ground, where he props her up and shifts her in a way where she can still watch Supay's display.
So that's how you do it.
He mentally chastises himself for having slipped up. While inconvenient, Navan's talents make everything worthwhile. Hell may have figured out how Azrael does his work, but now Azrael can find out how Supay does his. Azrael finally regains focus as the man arrives in front of his targets. The biggest of them shoves Supay, and the rest laugh. Azrael's breathing picks up in pace and matches Navan's own anticipating breaths.
Come on. Do it. Do it.
Then, Navan's wish comes true. Each man falls to the ground, blood leaking from their mouths, stomachs bloated, eyes red and dimmed. Azrael watches.
Wow, that was awesome. It's always a pleasure watching an old master reap. Wouldn't you agree, Azrael?
Azrael wants to grit his teeth, wants to lower his brow, wants to scowl, scream, and call her a liar. He doesn't. He simply stares impassively in her direction and nods. Azrael kneels before Navan and starts to remove his invisible thread from around her.
He's quite the example.
Azrael lies, having not been able to keep up with anything that Supay had done down there. His gaze occasionally flits back up to Hell as he finishes untying Navan. Hell is staring at him, and he fears her apathetic gaze may be wary of his words. Could she tell he's lying? Does she know that his eyes aren't as good as hers? No, there's no way. It's her. She's the one that's lying. She hadn't seen Supay either. She's just trying to psych him out. Fifth law of the killer's code. One never doubts the abilities of themselves or others.
Okay, Raven. It's time to land.
Azrael uses a finger to gently raise Navan's head up by her chin so that he can catch her scarlet gaze. She blinks until the red in her eyes becomes blue once more.
Azzy.
The start of a smile comes to her face. She's about to open her mouth to continue when Azrael raises a finger near his lips, shushing her. He stands, turns, and looks out to Supay, who's already finished converting his targets into Orison. Azrael bows, then looks from Hell to Navan. Hell nods, then opens up a portal. Navan stands up and walks to Hell's tear before running back and tackling Azrael. She isn't all that heavy and he could have taken the force, but instead he falls back, letting her think she'd pushed him over. She sits up on top of him, a smile smeared along her face.
I'll see you at home, Azzy. Love ya.
She gives him a peck on the cheek before bouncing off of him and speeding after Hell. Azrael takes 2 fingers to his face. Had he seen the kiss coming, he might have smiled for her. When it's clear that the 2 girls are gone, Azrael proceeds to Supay. He slides down the side of the cliff, then hurries to reach the side of his crouched master. Supay looks at him with squinted eyes. His mouth trembles as though he's chewing something.
Did you catch any of my technique, Azrael?
Of course. I saw everything.
I I guess I'll need to work even slower next time.
Supay rubs his chin, then takes several steps away from Azriel. Pulls his pickaxe out of the ground and slices upwards with it, opening a portal. Supay steps through the opening and Azriel follows, angered that yet another person may have seen right through him. The two share a gondola as they traverse the river Styx. As pupil, Azriel has to do all the rowing. When he first arrived, he had to rely on Charon to get him to and fro, but now he's gotten quite accustomed to directing himself. Up ahead, Azriel can see the river forking into two streams. One stream becomes a sea of steady flames, and the other pulsates with a faint green light. Shit. Was he supposed to get onto Phlegethon or Archeron? Azriel looks back and forth between the rivers, but before he can make a decision, he feels a knock at the left side of his head. He glances back to see Supay nodding towards the glowing river. Right. Archeron leads to left, which can get them to Death's domain. Of course. How many times had the Reaper said it before? Weeping precedes death, or something to that effect. A clever way to say that it isn't too long of a sail from the River of Woe to Death's domain. As they sail, Azriel notices a pattern to the pulsating light beneath their gondola. It's timed much like a heartbeat. The further they get, the more time there is between the flashes, not to mention the soft sound of crying growing from the river.
Have you memorized the 6th law yet?
Azriel grunts and glances over the side of the boat where he sees a number of damned souls swimming by. After all that happened today, Azriel really wasn't in the mood for a quiz. Even so, he tries to answer.
No matter what, remain focused.
Almost. But almost isn't good enough. Remember this. Above all else, be death.
Azriel glances back to the pallid surface of the river, the corners of his mouth tugging downwards as he pulls his hood forward. Be death. He still doesn't quite grasp the meaning. He kills his targets as he's bidden, swiftly, indiscriminately, never leaving a trace of his involvement, yet there's something lost on him. Something elusive, just out of reach. His teacher always reassures him that if he survives long enough, that he would understand in time. But that did nothing to assuage the frustration that grows inside him with each passing day. In spite of that, he doesn't let it show.
Yes, sir.
They sit in silence for a few more minutes. The only sounds are the creaking of the rotting wood of the boat and the sound of Supay's scythe as it cuts through the water. Azriel's eyes drift to the craggy shore on either side of them. He leans back in his seat, an airless sigh slipping past his lips. It brings with it the faintest memory, nothing more than a wisp of sight and sound, of himself as a small child, cold, alone and sputtering on those rugged beaches. He remembers being so cold and having that feeling of utter helplessness only known to children. A woman in white he hadn't known at the time, and then a comforting light. He doesn't have much time for reminiscing as Supay's worn voice seizes his attention.
Look alive, Azriel.
An ancient, decrepit pier hangs out above the water, jutting from the shore like a shattered limb. Docked boats, much like their own, bob at either side. Azriel's gaze makes its way up the beach to the fields beyond and the unassuming, crumbling ruins scattered amongst them. A few more strokes of his scythe bring them close enough to drop anchor, spectral tethers snaking out and linking their gondola to the dock. Supay swings his scythe up, hooking the blade onto the pier and pulling himself up in a fluid motion belying his age. He turns his attention to the end of the dock. Like always, Charon stands at the end of the pier, expectantly, wordlessly holding out a pale hand. The ferrymen no longer traverse the river to bring Psychopomps to their targets, instead loaning out gondolas for the assassins to use themselves, requiring payment upon their return. Supay slips a gnarled hand into his cloak. He drops a pair of oars into Charon's palm and steps around him. Azriel follows suit, striding past the ferryman onto the shore that lays before him. The path was hewn cleanly through the outcroppings that line the beach, working its way further inland until it disappears amongst overgrown foliage. Stray, pale lily petals waft past on a stale breeze as the trail leads him through a field of the ghostly flowers. As they draw closer to the mess hall, Azriel puts distance between himself and his teacher. He drops back and lowers his head. Like always, he lets Supay enter first. These halls once packed with killers are now sparse with only the best, most elusive, the luckiest remaining. Supay joins the other elders at the front of the room. Gathering near the end of the hall are two smaller cliques. Azriel pays a brief glance over to watch as Veals tries, and will presumably fail, in seducing Ishtar. It's funny to see how the cerulean-haired death god goes about his routine without cracking a grin. He presses a hand against the wall, right over Ishtar's blonde head. Her lion ears twitch slightly as his forearm brushes against them. Veals' lower half is like a snake, and by coiling his tail he's able to give himself even more height over the tan goddess. As far as Azriel can see, the entire display is more intimidating than romantic. There's a difference in the way Azriel watches things now. He sees with much more clarity. Sure, He hadn't been able to see Supe earlier, but he can definitely read these two. Even though they both look carefree, both death gods have to be alert and ready to kill at a moment's notice. The Grim Reaper made it clear to him when he joined. The first strike is most important for a Psychopomp. A good Psychopomp only needs one attack to kill. The Psychopomp to reveal their sight and not kill is a Psychopomp who will end up dead themselves.
Come on, Ish. I made a big score the other week. And the cut could be yours if you just...
I just what?
Ishtar glares up at Veals. She steps forward and flicks her wrist, which cause her fingernails to extend and sharpen at his neck. Her scythes.
You think you can buy me? What kind of girl do you think I am?
The kind that kills for money.
For power. Besides,
She steps back and shakes her head.
no man alive can survive my love. You wouldn't be any different.
Veals leans back and scratches at the little bit of hair he has on his chin. He gives her a look, as though contemplating his next move before finally speaking again.
Ugh, I get it. You're still hung up over Gilg.
At that point, Azrael sees something he couldn't when he first joined. It's like he can see the impulses traveling to Ishtar's muscles. There's a subtle twitch, a fine jerk right before her arm fires forward at Veals. With expert ease, she pinches his tongue between the sides of her claws. There she holds him, a flick of the wrist away from permanently removing the pink muscle.
What's the matter, lover boy? Cat got your tongue?
Azrael groans. He'll never understand Ishtar's insistence on using such horrible puns. According to Navan, he wasn't that much better, but he begs to differ. Another Psychopomp approaches the pair. Rhiannon's an odd assortment of parts. Her midsection is that of a headless young woman which tapers into the legs of an ebony Clydesdale. Beneath her right arm rests her head. She has a pale, freckled face and stringy, washed-out, carrot-colored hair. Her hair is so long it's parted into two twin tails that brush the floor.
Hey, you two. Stop this instant. No fighting.
Ishtar doesn't let Veals go, so the Dullahan holds her head up and thrusts it out towards the two.
Both of you. Hey. Listen up. I'm talking to you.
She beats her hooves into the ground and whips her tail. She groans, then lifts her head over her shoulders.
Remember the code. Law 4. No distractions.
Wow. You have the code completely committed to heart, don't you?
A common prank pulled among the younger Psychopomps was to ignore Rhiannon unless her head was above her neck. Azrael guesses it's some form of hazing, considering she's one of the newer recruits.
Yes. Don't we all? Isn't it like Psychopomp 101?
I mean, kind of. It's like a loose guideline, if anything.
Rhiannon stomps both of her front hooves down.
What? A loose guideline? What does that even mean? How can rules be loose? Don't you understand how important the code is to us? We should eat, sleep, and breathe it. It's how we stay alive. It's how we function. It's everything to us. It's what drives us forward towards our goals.
No distractions.
Veals points out while once again scratching his stubble.
Those laws got you pretty sidetracked. Didn't think old Rules Rhea would become a rule breaker herself.
Ishtar glances up at him. Veals looks down at Ishtar. They both nod to each other in some kind of agreement. Rhiannon tosses her head over her shoulder, and it lands perfectly in a saddle on her back. She's faced away from the other two, but from where Azrael is, he can see the red coming to her cheeks.
You can't just say that! It makes no sense! You can't break rules by following them. You two don't know anything!
You want to calm her down?
Ishtar asks, both hands covering her ears.
How?
Veals questions, uncoiling his tail so that he is closer to Rhiannon's height. He peeks down at Ishtar, then back to Rhiannon, who's still stomping about.
I don't know. Just do something to take her mind off the rules. Give her a distraction from her distraction, I guess.
Veals shrugs before slithering around Rhiannon. He picks up her head and brings it towards his face.
Here, I'll help you focus on what's important.
It doesn't go much further than that. Rhiannon's hind legs kick back into Veals' chest, causing him to drop her and go flying back. The situation didn't seem to faze Rhiannon as Azrael expected. Rather than looking upset or violated, she seems enlightened.
Of course. It all makes sense now. Some distractions are necessary.
Rhiannon spins around, tosses her head up, then ducks down just in time for it to land on her neck. In a flamboyant arch, she points at Veals and Ishtar.
My adherence to the code must be one of these necessary distractions. Thank you, Veals, for being such an insightful individual.
Rhiannon crosses her arms and nods.
Using a necessary distraction to block out unnecessary ones. Now, whenever I encounter a temptation, I'll simply think back to the killer's code.
Did she really have to repeat it so many times? Ishtar lets out a defeated-sounding meow as she helps Veals up.
Great. You've somehow made her worse.
As funny as these three are, Asriel can't let himself get attached. He's already made that mistake once within these ranks. Speaking of which, he let this distraction keep him away from his for long enough. So Asriel turns and looks to the other table where he finds Thanatos, Hel, and of course, his beloved Navan. Navan sits atop Thanatos' shoulders, and that makes Asriel angry. Navan looks happy talking to Thanatos, and that makes Asriel angry. Both of her arms cling around Thanatos' neck, and that makes Asriel angry. He reaches the table, angry. He sits down, angry. He looks at Thanatos, angry. He glances to Hel and nods, angry. He looks at Navan, and it all goes away.
Azzy?
Navan is the first to greet him, as usual, as expected, and as wanted.
I was beginning to think you liked your new friends a lot better than me.
Asriel shakes his head and he feels the need to brush some loose strands of ebony out of his face.
Of course not. They're all inefficient.
Huh, guess that's a word for it. Personally, I'd call it fun, but whatever.
Hel peeks up from a notepad she's been scrawling in. Asriel thinks he might have read Thanatos' name written a few dozen times over before Hel covers the page. By now they had all said something except for Thanatos. Asriel glances to him but doesn't make it obvious. Tries to make it look like he's staring at Navan, which honestly, he'd much rather do. But this asshole is in his way. Of all the butchers gathered here, Thanatos is the worst. There's a pompous air about him that just makes Asriel's blood boil. Even though he no longer bloodies his hands, he still breaks bread with killers. If the kid was even the least bit smart, he'd have left this organization centuries ago.
Hey, Navan. I'm leaving. The Reaper will be making an announcement soon, so I should be up there.
Thanatos stands and lets Navan leak off his shoulders. She pouts, and like that, Asriel's angry again.
Okay, Thani. We'll talk to you later.
There's a touch between the two. Navan's fingers drum along Thanatos' arm. Asriel knows it's just the way Navan is, that she doesn't know any better, that for her it's a completely innocent gesture, but it still leaves him seething.
Yeah, later. Whatever.
Hel tosses in quickly, and Asriel sees her take a quick look at Thanatos before looking back down to her notes. Thanatos nods and takes his leave. Good riddance. With a sigh, Navan plops down onto her seat across from Asriel. He feels a tug at his pant leg and glances down to see her bare feet, toes pinching at the dark fabric.
Hey, thinking about something?
She rests her chin in her hands and leans forward over the table. Asriel feels something. He fights the urge, beats it back.
Should I leave?
Asriel hears Hel's voice and sighs, almost thankfully. He'd begun feeling hot.
This is getting odd.
Navan touches Hel.
No, stay. I'm only razzing the Azzy a bit. He likes it.
She winks at him.
Don't you, Azzy?
Asriel doesn't respond. Not the way she probably expects, at least. He's fighting down the corners of his mouth as they conspire to betray him. So instead of responding to her question, he reaches out, puts a hand over hers, then pulls her forward. For the briefest of moments, while watching her draw near, lips part and eyes wide, he thinks about taking a risk. Instead, he gently turns her arm so that he can look for the cut he made earlier.
You're better. I'm glad.
Oh yeah, that? Hel took me by the river and got it cleaned up.
Asriel appreciates that. He'd been worried. A cut from his wires, like any Psychopomps scythe, wouldn't heal. Not without the water from the river.
Sorry.
Asriel rolls around the idea of saying more. It's not a secret, at least not with Hel. So in front of her it's okay to just care, right? As Asriel lets the thoughts move from his mind to the back of his throat, he feels a heavy silence descend upon the room. It isn't natural, never is. It hangs in the air, snuffing out any and every sound in the room, killing it expertly before it has a chance to spring to life.
Shh.
Even a pin dropping at that moment would go unheard. The Reaper has something to say. Reluctantly, Azrael lets go of Navan and shifts his attention front and center towards the elders. He feels something brushing along his side and pass over into his lap. With a glance down, he finds that forest of crimson hair he loves so much. He doesn't get to be this close with her too often, so he decides to treat his senses with her presence. The slightest tinge of cinnamon and death touches his nose, and it's better than he expected. He feels her gripping his arms, so he lets her guide him. Navan wraps his arms around her waist and then pushes her head back against his chest. He looks down at her, and she looks up at him. Even though he can no longer hear her, he can read her lips. Pay attention. Azrael smiles inwardly, then turns his focus forward and rests his chin atop her head. He watches as the Reaper puts some space between herself and the other elders, Anubis, Izanami, and Supei. They are all just like the Reaper. There's something monstrous about each of them. Anubis is a hulking figure with a face that's like some kind of black smog, almost in the shape of a jackal. Beside him is Izanami, whose skin is a dead, cold gray and covered with a thin film of sliminess. She has shining white eyes that peek from beneath a curtain of long black hair that hides most of her face. Then there's Supei, in all his oldness, standing there using his pickaxe to hold himself up. Last is the pale Reaper herself. While she does look mostly normal, there are occasions where her skeletal hands do creep out from beneath her long white sleeves. Azrael sees Thanatos off to the side of her. Their gazes pass over one another. Azrael wonders if Thanatos would notice the malice in his eyes.
So this is all that remains. Well, I guess you're just the best of the best, aren't you?
She looks to the other elders and finds Izanami motioning to her. So the Reaper waves a hand, and Azrael can suddenly hear the sound of Izanami breathing. That's right. She silences even the other elders.
We are going to just write off all those lost like this?
Izanami. She's a good teacher. Azrael can tell because even with the body of a horse and her head under her arm, Rhiannon does really good work.
Shouldn't we put our efforts towards confronting our hunter? The Psychopomps are the best killers around, yet there's someone out there who thinks they can combat us.
Izanami shakes her head, causing that wave of black hair covering her face to sway.
Do you want us, death itself, to die?
Azrael looks at the Grim Reaper, mostly because he feels Navan fidgeting in her seat and clenching at his robes. She's anxious, and judging from the room, everyone is. Ishtar, Veals, and Rhiannon all peek up on occasion from lowered heads. Even Hel isn't making any kind of eye contact with the Reaper's visage. The Reaper doesn't reply to Izanami, but does look over at Supei and Anubis. She waves a hand towards them, and like that, Azrael hears their breathing as well.
You two, do you agree with Izanami? Do you think that death is at risk of being killed?
She has this way about asking questions. Talking, really. Like if one were to say the wrong thing, that'd be it. Cut clean through and left his only memory smeared across her scythe. There are only two people that the Reaper seems to give any leeway, and that's Thanatos and Navan. Azrael can't figure out why she favors Thanatos at all, but he does know how much of a necessity Navan is. It's why she, of all the Psychopomps, can't just buy her way out. Not that it matters. She would never want to leave the Reaper.
Death is inevitable.
Anubis speaks up. Azrael never thought it fitting, hearing that soft, borderline sweet sound coming out of a monster.
We mustn't forget that just because we are gods. Death for us isn't treated as a natural thing, but perhaps this should be seen as a symbolic death, the end of the Psychopomps.
Anubis's mouth doesn't move as he speaks, but the blackness permeating about his face does shift from time to time.
We came into this world to guide mortal souls. Without that job, we should be done. By killing, we are asking to be killed.
Anubis.
She doesn't cut him off, which Azrael finds odd. She gave Anubis plenty of time to finish, so now Azrael makes sure to pay close attention to what she has to say.
Why are you telling me something I already know? You've never really liked my repurposing of our talents, have you? This won't be the first time the Psychopomps have died. We died out long ago, when mortal souls no longer needed guides. I decided the Psychopomps shouldn't become a memory. So we reincarnated into another form. That's what we'll do again. I mean, look at the mortal world. Evolution is natural, isn't it?
Anubis, without a word, simply nods. Next, the Reaper's sight falls on Supay. Supay looks up at her, coughs into his hand and gives a light chuckle, shaking his head. Figures. If there's anyone who follows her word, it's him, oldest of the old.
Back to my original point, then.
She says swiftly, then looks over the hall. The Reaper's eyes gaze over Ishtar, Veels, and Rhiannon before grazing over Hel, Navan, and himself.
I called you 3 elders here with your apprentices to offer you something. Why not work while our hunter is busy hunting elsewhere?
Azriel's eyes widen, and like that he understands. The Reaper has confirmation of the Psychopomp killer's recent activity. She knows he's out there and hunting, but she only informed those present in the mess hall. That means all other Psychopomps left were kept out of the loop as either bait or a distraction for the hunter. Azriel swallows. He's lucky enough to be in her graces this time, but how fickle could this woman be to let her own organization fall in such a way?
A name came up the river today.
The Reaper begins, earning audible reactions from the room. Everyone is excited. Well, as excited as a room of stoic killers is allowed to be. This is a chance for all of them to get stronger, probably one of the last few before people stop needlessly wasting what little divinity there is. The hunter catches up to them, or the Psychopomps are disbanded. Azriel can only hope for the latter. Rhiannon trots forward. She kneels her forelegs and raises her head.
Teacher,
She says, curving her palm so that her head faces Izanami.
please, endorse me. I want the job.
We've taken enough work recently. You can stand to keep low for a while.
But Master...
Is all Rhiannon musters before Azriel sees Izanami's hair fly up, momentarily revealing her face. He feels Navan jump and cling to him, so he looks down instead. By the time he's looking up again, Rhiannon has fallen in line behind Izanami.
Teacher.
Ishtar steps towards Anubis. She eyes him, holds up a hand and flicks out her claws. He simply shakes his head. She retracts her lengthened nails and lowers her ears before shuffling behind him. Judging by the way Veels is sitting and staring, he isn't going to bother. Azriel could take the job. Should take the job. He glances back at Hel. Maybe he can ask her for help. If he's got her coverage, then taking a job even with the hunter about is worth the risk. Right now, he needs to amass power as fast as possible. Azriel shifts in his seat, but the way of Navan keeps him planted. Okay, maybe they can wait a bit longer.
So, no one then. I'm surprised. Your apprentices normally have such hungry eyes about them.
She looks in the direction of Azriel's table. Azriel feels Navan clench and he himself looks up to catch the Reaper's gaze. Quickly, he looks away, his skin cold.
Cain.
The Reaper's word rolls off her tongue with an expert cunningness about it. He feels her gaze locked onto him in particular. He knows why.
That's the name of the target. In case it matters. How ironic. The first murderer is to be murdered. Though the payout isn't so great. I guess I can take the job myself.
Azriel feels something rocket him up. He's to his feet, and Navan is tied against his chest. He hadn't realized he'd been holding on to her.
I'll go.
Azriel is blunt, not even a look to Supay for any kind of approval. With a heavy step, he moves forward, setting Navan down as he goes.
Azzy?
He hears Navan question, and he pretends to ignore her. He hears it, maybe again, faintly. He can't tell anymore. There's a tugging on his robe, but it can't stop him.
Law 1, Azriel. Respect the elders.
Law 2. Seniority is weighed in souls taken, not years lived. In my short time here, I've nearly overtaken the kills of Izanami and Anubis, so I haven't spoken out of turn, if that's what you're implying.
Briefly, Azriel looks and catches Thanatos staring at him. He doesn't look for long. The Reaper tilts her head. There's something unnerving about her stare, but he presses on.
Allow Supay to endorse you. Get his blessing before going out there. Don't you fear the hunter?
Azrael fears the Grim Reaper more than the hunter, but he hates Cain more than he fears her.
One doesn't doubt the ability of themselves or others. Law 5.
Is this personal?
Azrael knows she's searching him and finding everything she needs.
Because if it's personal, I can't let you go. Only kill for pay. Law 3.
I'll still get paid, won't I? Who cares if it's personal? No distractions either. I'll end him. I know how I want to do it, and...
The Reaper cuts him off, not with a scythe, but with her words.
You're sounding a lot like...
Like a battle between blades, Azrael cuts her off right back.
He's dead.
Azrael grits his teeth and emotion starts to leak through. He knows at this point he's broken the code so many times over, and he's verbally attacking the Grim Reaper herself, but he doesn't care, because...
I'm going to kill him.
After that, he expects it. To cut through. The clean, cold steel. It'll feel the way he imagines. It wouldn't hurt for long, and after that, he'd be reunited with so many as a trophy staining the Reaper's blade. He has a mission, a goal, yet the mere mention of that man's name puts him at a hair's length of losing it all.
Boy!
He doesn't know what puts him on his knees, if it's his respect for Supay, or the weight of the old man's word. He's on his knees, staring at the ground, shivering, sweating. He hears what those men earlier must have heard, the way Supay's rags drag along the ground. Unlike those men, Azrael knows what comes next. He hears Supay come to a stop at his side and sees his cold-cluttered robes out of the corner of his eyes.
Let him have the job. It's time we see if he really has what it takes to be a dealer. I'll even supervise in case things get messy.
Azrael doesn't look up, not until he feels a hand on his shoulder, Supay's. As it rises, so does he. Azrael turns to see the Reaper staring him down. He watches her eyes, follows them as they fall on Navan. He grows cold, like he thinks he would if the Reaper herself ever touched him. Then, with a simple nod to Navan, whose expression is somewhere between confusion and fear, the Reaper speaks.
Don't say I've never done anything for you.
The Reaper summons a goblet which she offers to Azrael. It's filled with water from the river. As with each time before, Azrael takes the chalice and drinks from it, binding him to the contract.